to take on the world with all that's tried, with all that's life. We learn to love, we learn to cry, we learn if you run and you give up, did they hold you down long enough until you knew what you were made of? Did you dance in the middle of the floor on a Saturday night? Did you try to take on the world? Did you leave me behind? I wait on the same sidewalk that we grew up, 'cause I know you always walk the same way back, where you learn to live, you learn to love.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the WIF Q&A. I'm here with the extremely talented filmmaker, Jonathan Elliot, writer, director, producer of the beautiful film, Her Water Drum. John, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me. It's really great to be here.
Your film, really wonderful film. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And so let's just start with, how did you develop the concept? How did you develop the story? And where did it come from?
So the concept, it's kind of hard to avoid the subject of missing murder Indigenous women and girls, particularly in Indigenous communities. Rightfully so. It's getting its much due attention, not as much as it should be still, unfortunately, but it is starting to kind of permeate a little bit more into kind of like normal society and Canadian culture and stuff. So kind of what I wanted to do with the project and where it started was I work on a bunch of different TV shows that take place in Indigenous communities. And I was traveling around Canada multiple summers, and I was going to a lot of these reserves and communities all across Canada. And the thing that was startling to me was that at the time, this issue really just kind of seemed like a statistic. It was the inquiry was happening, and there were stories coming out, but to me, it still hadn't been totally personalized. But then when I started meeting people whose families were affected, whose family members had gone missing or were murdered, it really kind of like struck home to me, because I noticed a lot of similarities between their stories of, things weren't being taken seriously. Police weren't actually, engaging with them and the families to actually put out missing persons cases and to follow through with the cases that were happening. So I don't know, for me, that kind of really like struck home, because I was like, this is now what I can personally recognize as a problem that's affecting communities all across Canada. So I started having conversations with some of the family members of being like, has anybody, told your story outside of the news? Has anybody bothered to, kind of like take your perspective and like really present stories from that perspective, rather than like an outsider just reporting on the case and reporting on things that were happening. And a lot of them said no. And I was like, that feels very strange to me, that we're not actually, talking about this from our perspective in a way that isn't just like, just news. So I started connecting with a lot of those families like afterwards and collecting their stories, and they were gifting me these stories because, as part of our Indigenous people's like storytelling process, it's a lot of maintaining and making sure that intention is there and respect is there when we're telling each other stories. So I started to ask them, would you be okay with maybe like me interviewing you and talking about these experiences, and not directly adapting a particular family's situation, but taking from elements of a lot of these families that I was interviewing and kind of like making something that represented the issue as a whole. And then there was a program with Charles Street and Imaginative. They were doing their residency programs in 2018, and they were looking for projects to fund that were Indigenous themed and like run by Indigenous creatives, that were just short films, anywhere from like 5 to 10 minutes. So I applied to that and got it with this concept. And then from there, it was reaching out to these families, interviewing them, pulling all these elements together and workshopping the scripts with their input for months just to make sure that things felt right. Things weren't leaning too far into, kind of like any sort of like exploitative realm, because for me, that is 100% not what I wanted. I didn't want to be graphic. I didn't want it to be in any way exploitative of that situation. I wanted to just kind of present it honestly from the family's perspective and kind of talk about what it would be like to experience this and make it more personal rather than just exploiting the situation and like making it for shock factor for people to understand. And it took a long time, a lot of workshopping that script and like sending it around, getting a lot of different feedback from several people. It went through very different iterations. It was longer at one point, it was shorter at one point, but I think we kind of brought it to the point where it needed to be, to get the point across, but not kind of veer off into shortchanging the subject or making it too long for people to feel like it was digestible and easy to watch.
So how long was the process from, the first time you kind of put pen to paper or fingers to the keys on your computer,
Mhm.
and to actually shooting the film? And then how long did you shoot, and how long did it take for you to actually lock picture?
Yeah, so I think I applied to the Imaginative Residency Program around November, December. We got the word that we were accepted into it about a month later. And then from December until April, so about 4 months, it was exclusively just working on the script, getting input from everybody. And then I believe we shot at the end of April. So we were kind of in soft pre-production that whole time as well. Just getting, like crew on board and then casting and all that. So we shot for what was supposed to be 3 days at the end of April. It turned into 4 because at the time there was a really bad hailstorm one day. It just came out of nowhere when we were shooting. We were shooting on Six Nations, where I'm from, the reserve, kind of near Hamilton, Brantford area. And we were shooting in a trailer. The whole film takes place in a trailer. And at one point, we just had this terrible storm sweep in out of nowhere, unannounced. And because it's a tin roof, we couldn't shoot because the sound was just terrible. And on top of that, most of the crew was coming from Toronto. We were driving back and forth every day. So we had to cancel the shoot like halfway through our day and be like, all right, everybody, we'll try to get you home, take your time. So I think everybody, it took maybe like 3.5, 4 hours for people to get back to Toronto safely. So we had a pickup day to kind of replace that. And then after we were done our 4 days of shoot, it took maybe about like 3 months in post, all told, from assembly to picture locking and getting the sound mix done and everything. So yeah, it was a fairly long timeline just because there were a lot of cuts. Sometimes it wound up longer. We cut several scenes out, and we just really wanted to make sure that we had the time to really make sure the film was kind of hitting every beat that it needed to, and felt well paced. So yeah, it took a good amount of time, and then it premiered at Imaginative in 2018, which was really great, and I think that was the right place for it to premiere. So yeah, it was really quick but fat, or I don't know, quick but also long kind of timeline of just once the film was finished, we had to wait 3 months for anybody to see it. So yeah.
And what was your budget for the film?
So I think budgeted around, it was maybe 14 or 15,000 Canadian, give or take, all told. We did an Indiegogo campaign for the film that raised a lot of money. It raised I think 60 to 70% of our budget. And then the rest of that was kind of rounded out by the Charles Street Imaginative Residency Program. And then I was able to kind of pull a few favors from friends just for gear rentals and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it wound up being around that $14,000 to $15,000 range, which is usually kind of I don't know, for shorts like this where it was very minimal cast and a very contained story. That's kind of, I don't know, that was a wheelhouse I was comfortable working in at the time, and we made it work. Every single penny went to use on this one, so it was thrifty, but we made it work, and yeah, it was good.
Well, it's a really remarkable testament to, and for the audience today, and for uh, filmmakers to know that while we would all love $1 million to make a film, you've just proven you can make a beautiful, impactful, sort of movie to movement with a minimal budget.
Hmm.
I
Yeah,
mean,
I think.
not that that's desirable because everybody wants to get paid. So, what was the distribution for your film after Imaginative?
So what we did was myself and the producer Eric Orff, we kind of just wanted to exclusively run the film for a festival circuit. So for us, that was really targeting. Personally, I wanted to target a lot of just the Indigenous film festivals. I wasn't too concerned with, some of the other big festivals because I was like, I want this to feel. I know the audience for this film movie. It's people who are interested in Indigenous issues. It's Indigenous people. So I really wanted to kind of like focus on that demographic and make sure that we were kind of hitting those festivals because for me, it's like that is the core audience for the movie. Is people who have that awareness of the issue at least a little bit, and then people who maybe have personal connections to it as well. It kind of went all over the place. I think it's been in over like 20, 25 festivals since 2018, which is pretty good. Yeah, we went to like Maryland, Los Angeles, Redskin Film Festival. We went to LA Skins Festival, Montreal, First People, like Sioux Film Festival, kind of, yeah, like all over the place, which was really nice. And then, yeah, like as it stands right now, we're still figuring out like where it's going to live now because the festival circuit's kind of over with the film. So we're figuring out that final stage of like going online and distributing, whether it's through Amazon or a few other places that we've kind of like talked to. We're just figuring out what the best home is for it. Because for me, I don't know, I'm a big proponent of having free access to, short content and stuff like this that is, I hope, socially relevant. I'm not a huge fan of like paywalls or anything like that because I feel like it really just kind of minimizes not only the amount of people, but again, the people that I hope the film is targeted for. There's a lot of like lower income communities and like Indigenous communities and stuff. So I want to be able to have that film accessible to people as an educational resource. We've talked to a few different programs for that as well, of getting it into schools to kind of like talk and educate, students about these issues as well. So yeah, we're trying to follow up in a way that just makes it as accessible as possible.
It's a very emotional subject, as you said off the top. Critically important subject to talk about, hard subject to talk
Hmm.
about, but critically important. How was it as a Indigenous man staying in this subject matter for as long as you did, as a writer, creator, a filmmaker? And then talk about your casting process and how you chose Jolene and the other actors in the film.
Yeah, I think it was really difficult to actually kind of like stay in the headspace as long as it took to actually get the film made, from writing and like planning up until actually screening it. And even still now, it's a little difficult because it opens you up to very difficult conversations and hard conversations, and people who watch the movie come at things from very different perspectives, and like maybe not, maybe just lack of understanding or awareness of the issue.
Mhm.
So you kind of have to come at it from a perspective of being very open to what other people's responses are going to be to it. And I think for a long time, I kind of struggled with balancing, my personal feelings with the issue and like my family's personal feelings with the issues and other people I know and the families of people who are affected that I interviewed, and with kind of like a more general audience who are coming at it from a place of like very little understanding or very little awareness of the issue. So I think it was, for a while, it was very just difficult for me to kind of like marry those two things in my head and be like, is the script catering too much to that perspective, or is it, not giving enough information for people to connect to it? And I think eventually I kind of came to the point where I was like, you know what, I think, um, having all those elements there is important, but the way that people will connect to it is through the characters, and through their journey, because I think I tried to make it as much as possible that you can really empathize with the characters and what they're going through. The very fact that like a family member is missing, they're not receiving support, and it feels like they're already kind of like against the ropes financially, they're against the ropes like societally and like culturally, that this on top of that just kind of makes somebody feel almost not hopeless, but like it's a very difficult uphill battle. And without that support, it's very difficult to actually maintain having a good mind and like, you know, being open to um, kind of like maintaining a positive view on the subject. So that kind of came from my personal perspective, and that's how I thought a lot of people would connect to it. So it was important when we were casting to find people who could really convey that sense of, you know, a strong family dynamic, but could also play that really internal struggle of, because the whole movie is about like this duality of trying to keep your relationship strong with people that are still around, but having very different coping mechanisms and not being able to totally relate to how somebody is grieving and what their trauma responses are. Because Jolene, the mother in the film, played by Nadia George, she really brought a lot to it because she is an Indigenous woman, she is a mother, and she was really kind of pulling on her own perspectives of like, you know, if this was happening to me, like how would I relate? She was a social worker as well, so she really had an understanding of this subject very particularly, which I think helped the performance immensely and also brought a lot to the movie as far as like just making it feel very authentic and how she was portraying the character. A lot of things that happened in the movie weren't scripted, just as far as like the way she was playing things, but we both kind of just wanted to make sure that whatever was authentic in the moment and whatever felt real was the choice that we went with. And then Michael, who plays the young character David, her son, he had really only acted on stage like once or twice before. But when we were doing the casting, there was just something about the way that he would play the character that felt very like earnest and felt very real. And I know a lot of kids that kind of like they kind of like shut down into themselves. Like even I, when I was younger, like, you know, dealing with family issues, would kind of just like close off and go off on my own and like, you know, play make believe, and like that's how you would kind of like subconsciously deal with things.
Right.
And he really had that energy and like that kind of like inherent understanding of that response to things. And I think for me, that more than anything, I was like, yeah, this feels real. This feels like I understand this character and I know the way he's playing it, and that makes me connect to it more. So I think like we did open casting calls and we had a lot of people audition for all the roles, but there was just something about both of those two. When I saw their audition tapes, I was just like, yeah, this is connecting to me immediately. And it just feels authentic. And I think for me, that's always the thing that I try to, you know, look for the most in casting is, you know, whether or not it's playing, even in auditions, like the way that I imagined it, or the lines are not being delivered the way I imagined it, then like if it feels right, then that's kind of the biggest indication for me, because that just means that every decision you make when you're working together afterwards is coming from a place of kind of just inherent understanding of the issue. And that I think is like the biggest connection that, you know, as a director you look for in your actors, is just making it very personal for them, and knowing that they're bringing something to it that isn't just, you know, what's on the page.
I have two questions from the audience.
Okay.
From Melissa Kalu. What's your type, the type of genre that you focus on while you're making your films? What's most important to you, and what content is most important to you when you're making your films?
That's actually a really good question, because I do find that, like, I don't know, when I'm like making a movie that has like, let's say for this instance, it was like a drama film. I was looking at a lot of dramas, in particular short dramas, because I find like sometimes feature films can be not super helpful as far as like a short filmmaker of knowing how tonally to convey a message in a really short period of time, because there's so much time that you don't have. So I kind of go on like Vimeo and short of the week and stuff like that. And I look for films that tonally I kind of resonate with, and I'm like, yeah, that feels like it's similar as far as just the approach and like the feeling that I want to convey. So I'll go on and like just search for like days and days and days, looking at all these different short films that subject-wise doesn't need to relate to what I'm talking about, but like, you know, just has that same tone to it. And I think like it's important to me kind of whenever I'm actively working on like, let's say the script or anything like that, or the editing, that I surround myself with that type of content, because it kind of just keeps you in the right headspace, but you can also see how other people are working through some of the same issues that you might be facing.
Mhm.
Like I find it really kind of like discombobulating to like watch a comedy when I'm like actively working on either the edit or the script or something. It just kind of like throws me off mentally of where I want my headspace to be. And obviously you kind of have to do that within reason, because if you're dealing with a subject matter that's difficult, and deals with a lot of grief and trauma, then you just have to make sure that you're doing it in kind of like contained bursts, so you're looking after yourself too. But yeah, I just try to like listen to music and watch movies that are tonally kind of keep me in the right headspace. It's a good
Right.
question.
This is from Brendan Burrow. Hi, John. Thanks for your film. I like the approach you took to develop an intimate representation of the actual effects of missing and murdered Indigenous women on families. Do you think settlers need to see these kind of films in order to gain some sort of respect and understanding of the emotional gravity of this and many other issues? In other words, how do you feel about settlers absorbing such an intimate piece like your film?
That's a really good question. I think, like as I was mentioning earlier, when you're writing and when you're editing and like going to be releasing a movie that's about a subject that is very culturally based and based in a certain identity, that you're opening it up to audiences from different backgrounds, and kind of allowing that input to happen. And I think for me, it is this film was also made in some ways as like an educational tool, right, to introduce people to these issues. Because I think that was also another big reason why I wanted to make the movie in the first place, was when I was talking to so many people who are non-Indigenous, from multiple different backgrounds across Canada. A lot of people, even though to me it was very much in the news cycle, were just still unaware of the gravity of the situation, of the amount of women and girls who had gone missing or were murdered, and just like how far reaching this issue was. So I wanted to make a movie that could address that and allow people to kind of like get an understanding of the gravity of the situation and the severity of it. But again, kind of making it so that it's connectable and like, easy to kind of like understand coming from an outside perspective. I just tried to really focus in on that relationship again of the mother and the son, and really trying to make people be placed in, what would I do if this was my family and I had a family member who had gone missing, and really honing in on that core aspect of it, because I think that makes it transferable to everybody. You don't need to be from an Indigenous background to have the thought of how would I deal with this situation if a family member had gone missing and there was nothing I could do about it and I wasn't getting the help that was required to deal with the situation. That's, I think, just understandable for every single person. And I think that was kind of how I just wanted to open it up to people, was just understand this situation and then use it as a tool to kind of like talk about the very real issue of missing murdered Indigenous women and girls, and give it kind of that introductory element to allow people to then hopefully do continued research into it, and get more awareness and learn about it and educate themselves about it, because it's an issue that isn't going away. It's continuing to happen now, and I think with kind of renewed focus on Indigenous issues and Indigenous equality and like demand for equal rights and representation, it's important to kind of inundate yourself with as much educational material as possible. And I think there's so many talented Indigenous filmmakers all across Canada and the States that are now using this medium to kind of talk about very important issues in a way that is personal and from our perspective. And I think that's the biggest thing is, if you're going to look for material like this, then just make sure that it's made by Indigenous people, it's from a real perspective, and that it's, it's just authentic, because, a lot of people are making movies about issues that they probably shouldn't, from a perspective that isn't necessarily the right one to be viewing it from. So for me, that's like a big thing. And I think there's just a plethora of films, amazing films that you can watch about this issue and others. There's a movie by Sonia Bialu, who is a director from out near Ottawa, and she made the movie Rustic Oracle, which is a feature film, deals with the same issue of missing murdered Indigenous women and girls. That is one of the best movies I saw last year, probably my favorite movie I saw last year. I think it's coming out soon on like iTunes and Vimeo on Demand and stuff like that. So that would be another movie that I would suggest if this, if this was an introduction to it and you want to know a little more and stuff like that. That would be, yeah, one movie I would definitely suggest for sure.
Melissa Kalu also sent a comment and question. I wanted to also share that in ceremony, the water drum represents the woman, and we as women hold water while we carry our babies.
Mm-hmm.
The short film that you made also was made around missing, murdered Indigenous women's movement. And those two subjects definitely go hand in hand. And I want to say thank you.
Mm-hmm.
It's very heartwarming to continue to see Indigenous filmmakers who touch on these important issues that we face in our daily lives. So that's from Melissa.
Oh, thank you, Melissa. It means a lot. Yeah, I'm happy that that connection was there, because that was something that was workshopped again for a long time. My sister and I kind of went back and forth of, we wanted just some sort of like physical representation of Kira, the daughter who was missing, to be present in the film and to be kind of like this driving wedge kind of between the two characters. And they both relate to it in different ways. Kira was teaching David how to play the drum. Jolene bought Kira the drum in the first place. And like, there's like that flashback scene where she walks into the room and sees her playing it and stuff. So for me, that connection was for the characters, but also, yeah, on a cultural and like perspective, the water drum is our traditional like Mohawk instrument, and there's a lot of ceremonial significance to its connection to the female body and to women in general, but also to our medicines and how things are presented. So yeah, I'm happy that that connection was there. Yeah.
Well, I'm just going to turn my car on and shut the windows in my car for 1 second because it's starting to rain. There. The last thing, I know we only have a couple minutes left, John, but I wanted to ask you, so how is it as an artist when you carry this responsibility as an Indigenous creator, filmmaker, to represent and also to express, sort of the reality, and then just being an artist and a creator and having that, the space to, express yourself. How do you sort of navigate those two worlds?
Yeah, I think that is difficult. I'll try to be brief, but I think like for me, the biggest struggle is always, kind of like balancing that more personal perspective, but also, like you said, there's this kind of inherent responsibility that I take, is that when I'm telling a story that deals with Indigenous issues, communities, and very personal stories, I am always focused entirely on just making sure that it's done with respect, it's done with the right care, and it's authentic, but also it's telling the story from the perspective that it requires, and that if I'm telling somebody else's story or adapting somebody else's story, that they personally feel like it's being told in the right way. There's nothing worse than somebody taking somebody else's story and totally changing it completely to fit a prescribed narrative that you want for a movie.
Right.
But by doing that, you are robbing the story of everything that the person who told it to you or shared it with you was hoping to get across. So for me, that kind of responsibility of just making sure that the community is represented and people are represented properly and with care. It's a difficult line to walk, but I think like if you are doing it in a good way and constantly making sure that people feel okay with it and like, they're approving it, then it makes you as the filmmaker feel so much more assured in knowing that like, if nothing else, if the movie doesn't connect with people, at the very least, I'm telling the story in a way that is authentic to the person who shared it with me in the first place, and they feel respected. The movie's, it's been seen by a lot of people who have, been personally affected by this issue, and the biggest compliment that I could ever receive is that they feel like they are being cared for, and that it's respectful, and that it presents the issue, just in a way that is sensitive and allows for real discussion rather than just using it as like a narrative device to be shocking or, so I think that's kind of just, that's always my focus. It's a difficult balance to walk.
Well, thank you so much, Jonathan, for her water drum, and also articulating that a film doesn't have to be 90 minutes to have incredible impact and to tell a beautiful story. So congratulations on your film, and thank you so much for sharing it with the festival.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I was really happy that the festival took the film and that it screened and people were engaged and wanted to ask questions. So thanks so much for allowing me the time to kind of talk about it a little more. I really appreciate it.
Have a great day.
You too.